All right. Thank you for joining us today. First, I'd like to welcome everybody to another edition of the Demystified webinar. My name is Bob Engel. I'm the Customer Service Manager here at White Cloud Electronic Cigarettes. We're really excited for today's webinar because we are honored to have two leaders in the world of e-cigarette advocacy with us, Tony Abboud from the Vapor Technology Association and Dimitris Agrafiotis, the Chairman of SEVIA USA. So we've built in a good amount of time here for questions and answers in this webinar, so please feel free to send us any questions you have. To ask a question, all you need to do is click the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen. We received a lot of questions through email already, and we anticipate that the viewers will have a lot more questions as well. We want to ask, if you want to ask a question for one of the presenters, just let us know in the question, and we'll address that specifically with the presenter. A simple question is for Dimitri or Tony will suffice. We will do our best to get all of them out, but we will only have an hour to get to all the questions we have. So if Tony or Dimitri cannot get to one of your questions live, we're going to do our best to answer all the questions via email after the webinar. So also, if you'd like to follow along with us or ask questions via Twitter, you can use the hashtag Demystified. That's DEMISTIFIED, and we're going to spell that out for you in the bottom of the chat window here. So if you want, you can just copy and paste that in there. Just a quick note before we get going, we'll have another webinar scheduled for Monday, June 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. This webinar will be an interview and Q&A with Aaron Biebert. He's the director of A Billion Little Lives documentary. So there's going to be a link to register for that webinar in the follow-up email to this webinar, or you can access the link through our Facebook page or the White Cloud Electronic Cigarettes webpage. Both of our speakers are being very generous with their time today, and we appreciate them being here. It's important to remember that the answers they give today are their opinion and do not constitute legal advice. So there may be some questions that they simply just cannot answer. All right, so let's jump right into things here. Our first speaker today is Tony Abboud. Tony is the National Legislative Director of Vapor Technology Association. The VTA promotes entrepreneurship, responsible public policies, and a high standard of safety for the vapor industry through the representation of manufacturers, wholesalers, and small business owners of innovative vapor products. So the VTA has been working tirelessly on changing the predicate date by implementing a bipartisan strategy to pass the Cole-Bishop Amendment. Tony, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Bob. We appreciate you having me on, and also thanks to White Cloud.
Oh, it's great to have you here. And again, thank you for taking the time out of your day. Tony, can you give us a little background on the VTA? I know it's relatively a newer group, but you have a lot of industry leaders on board at the VTA.
That's correct. It's a relatively newer group, but with a lot of industry veterans. The VTA stands for the Vapor Technology Association. The Vapor Technology Association was formed late last year, officially launching in January of this year. What we did is we wanted to provide some leadership in the vapor industry, and we put together a board of really experienced legal, public policy, and FDA regulatory experts. You can check out who's on the board. I won't necessarily go through it right now at our website, which is simply vaportechnology.org. That was the first step. The second step was assembling a team, a really good public affairs team, as well as a governmental affairs team in Washington, D.C. And what we did is we hired Westfront Strategies, which have been working on vapor issues for 2-3 years now on the Hill. And so they're really known as the vapor lobbyists in Capitol Hill, which has provided us incredible ability to have insight as to what's happening before it happens, as well as in terms of executing strategies for moving forward. And we're very excited about those strategies. And then the third thing that the main component that we've added to our strategy is really a strategic public affairs strategy, which often goes unnoticed and unheralded, but it makes a big difference in terms of changing minds. And that's what a lot of the effort is about. We got to change the minds and understanding of legislators, not only in Washington, D.C., but around the country. And so we have a concerted and holistic strategy involving all of those components.
Thank you for that explanation, Tony. It's great to see all these industry leaders coalescing around these FDA regulations. I know one of the things that VTA is working on is Vape and the FDA conference. Can you give us a little detail on what's going to take place on June 7th and 8th?
Yeah, well, because of the experience that our board has in dealing with FDA issues, We know what we knew would happen. We all knew the deeming was coming. We all knew basically how bad it was going to be. And so we plan to, we're anticipating when that comes down, the one thing that the community would need is some real guidance. And so what we did is we put together a panel of legal experts to help break down the deeming. Everybody's been kind of struggling through this massive documentation, through the guidance documents as well as the actual regulation itself. And a lot of it doesn't make any sense. Now, some of that is intentional. I mean, the FDA, and it's what they call their guidance documents, and sometimes you want to put that in quotes, only because they don't necessarily provide a lot of guidance. But we decided we need to bring people together as soon as possible in order to help give some very specific and practical information on compliance, what the deeming means to you if you are a manufacturer, what the deeming means to you if you are a retailer, what the deeming means to you if you're a component supplier, what the deeming means to you if you are a manufacturer/retailer. And there's a lot of tricky issues and tricky questions that are being raised. So Vape and the FDA manage it. Understand It, Manage It is the name of our conference, and it's being held on June 7 and 8 in Washington, D.C. at the Fairmont Hotel. If you need more information on it, if I can go ahead and plug that, you can go right to our website. Again, it's vaportechnology.org. And you can find links there for how you register. But the conference on day one is going to be all about breaking down the deeming. And like I said, through a series of legal experts that can provide information and break it down for each of the categories I mentioned. Then day two, we're going to go to Capitol Hill with our lobbying team and take all those interested folks to the Hill to go ahead and lobby for the passage of the Cole-Bishop Amendment. So the timing couldn't be perfect because we know that the vote on the Cole-Bishop Amendment is going to be coming up in June, and that's our anticipated date. And so we wanted to plan the conference and the visit to the Hill at the same time to have the most maximum impact we could.
Thank you for that explanation, Tony. We're going to do our best to put out links for the event as well. Moving on to another question here. I understand that you have some breaking news out of Illinois.
Well, you know, one of my jobs is as a lobbyist, also as a state lobbyist, and here in Illinois, and you know, just as they had in California, they're trying to raise the smoking age to 21. And I think they were hoping since they had success in California, that they'd be able to pass it here in Illinois as well, which often happens. Once a bill passes in one state, they try to push it in other states. So the bill, we had it bottled up and finally got out of the Senate, but today, when they convened the House committee to actually hear the bill, they just didn't have the votes. So we did a lot of work to make sure that the votes weren't there. We worked with a pretty good coalition of groups, and sponsor could not call the bill. So there's still a few more days left in the session in Springfield, but it was a very big step forward today because they're going to be in a very difficult position to try to get this bill heard now.
That's excellent, Tony. I mean, that's a great victory there in Illinois as well. Now let's jump into some of the Cole-Bishop Amendment in H.R. 2058. Can you explain the difference between Cole-Bishop Amendment and H.R. 2058?
Sure. Well, the first and most fundamental difference that needs to be articulated is the fact that the Cole-Bishop Amendment is moving. It is in a vehicle that is and must move, okay? And I think that is absolutely critical. When we're talking about changing the predicate date and how important it is for our industry, we need to throw all of our collective weight behind the vehicle that, in fact, will move forward. And that's a big distinction that people, I think, need to understand, because 2058 is a bill, that's true, and it's a bill that's on file. That is also true. But without movement, without a path forward, without a strategy behind it, it's just unlikely to move. And that's in large part evidenced by the fact that the sponsor of 2058 is also the sponsor of the Cole-Bishop Amendment, and Representative Tom Cole from Oklahoma. And he's basically stood up in Congress and has publicly said now on multiple occasions that my Cole-Bishop Amendment is better than what we tried last year. And what they tried last year was the same language in 2058. And that unfortunately failed in December of 2015. And when one strategy fails, you move forward. And so the bipartisan nature of Cole-Bishop is another fundamental distinction between the two bills. And the reason there is some bipartisan support for the Cole-Bishop Amendment is because in the amendment, it includes some specific changes in the law that would move forward or move the government forward in terms of being able to regulate and implement some common sense business regulations that basically all industry and all consumers do support and should support. And so that is a big fundamental difference. Whereas the Cole bill, HR 2058, simply says we want to change the predicate date. The Cole-Bishop Amendment says we need to change the predicate date, and as an industry, we are willing to implement some of these common sense regulations to demonstrate our commitment to common sense regulations of our industry. And that is a much stronger message to take forward. It's a message that you can send to and sell to members of Congress in both parties. And that's why there's a Democratic co-sponsor and a Democrat who stood up in committee and said, this is the way forward.
Great. Thank you for that, Tony. Now, with the, can you explain what the VTA strategy is to help pass the Cole-Bishop Amendment?
Sure. Well, we started this early in the year. So the first step was, okay, we need to get a bipartisan strategy together. So that was where the language was developed to encourage bipartisan support. And frankly, we were told that, unless we got some sort of bipartisan support, this predicate date issue wasn't going to move on its own. So in doing so, we started to develop that with members on the committee, focusing on them, messaging to them, communicating with them, and then language was introduced. And I think there's a lot of confusion as to how the process works. There's a big difference in the appropriations process than the regular order in which most of the bills, including 2058, have to go through. So in the appropriations process, language is submitted into the committee that is being requested, and different groups and different companies and different entities may all submit all their own language, and then the committee itself kind of distills all of that and decides what they want to come out with, and they talk to leadership, and then you talk to, of course, some of the lead sponsors. And so what came out as the Cole-Bishop Amendment is what they thought they could actually move forward, and sure enough, they had Democratic support for it, so they were happy to move that forward. Now, moving forward, we have two critical inflection points in this fight. Well, there's three. The first one we won. That was on April 19, when the markup took place in the House Appropriations Committee on the Agricultural Appropriations Bill. And to achieve that victory, we worked exceptionally hard with our lobbying team in working all of the members of the committee. And then we also actually sent out a call to action, encouraging everybody to call in and get, on behalf of the industry, support for the Cole-Bishop Amendment. And we also worked in other ways, getting deep into some districts to help sway support from some key members of Congress. And that's where the public affairs work comes into play. And that's why I was talking earlier about how we have this integrated strategy that makes all the difference. I think the work that we've done was absolutely essential in getting the support of the two Democrats, and we're very, very proud of that. And so that was step one. Getting in the bill is the hard part because it's a big vehicle and it's a big step forward. And it was really the first pro-vaping vote in the United States Congress in our industry's history. So we were very happy about that. So what's next? Okay, you can't just lay on your laurels, right? That's June is what's next. What's coming up in June is a potential challenge to that language staying in the bill. So there may be an attempt to strip the language out of the bill. That's what Democrats may try to do. If the Democrats attempt to do that, then our job is to make sure that doesn't happen, which is why we've been consistently calling for everybody to make sure that everybody in Congress knows that, or in the House knows that they must support the Cole-Bishop Amendment. And that's in part what our next call to action will be about, as well as what our Day on the Hill is all about, because we need to make sure that everybody is standing up tall and fighting clearly to say that Cole-Bishop Amendment must stay in the House Appropriations Bill. Now, if we clear that hurdle, that means our language is in the House Appropriations vehicle up until the end, when a Senate and the House then negotiate out the terms of what will be in a final appropriations bill that gets to the president for signature. And again, the next phase of that battle is making sure that the Senate has that we have support in the Senate and we have support amongst leadership, so that in fact, when it comes time to hash out the details, we again stay in the bill. But we are in a much stronger position as an industry today because we are in a vehicle, and we are in a vehicle that must move at some point. So I'm very encouraged, but we cannot stop working, and we cannot stop being very clear about the need to support Cole-Bishop amendment.
Thank you, Tony. Now, when the Cole-Bishop bill passes, will that change be a permanent change, or would that have a period of, say, 2 or 3 years?
So it's an appropriation strategy, right? So and so the appropriate, and this is, I think, something that people don't fully understand about the amendment. But the appropriations, the fact that it's an appropriation strategy is it restricts FDA funding to implement the regulations against products that are on the market. So technically, it will persist for a period of years until we have a new appropriations process in place. But the bottom line is, what we need to do right now is save the industry. So whether it's permanent or not is not really the key issue. The key issue is that as of August 8, 2016, we will have made sure that the products that are on the market on that date get to continue to be sold to the general public, which is a huge win for consumers, and it's a huge step forward for the industry, because this is really only phase one. Phase one is what I've just described, getting through this process and getting this amendment passed. Phase two is really, now we would have the opportunity to go to work on really impacting and changing the regulatory scheme that's been laid down by the FDA. But I think it's somewhat pie in the sky to think that right now you can do anything until we get this predicate date changed. Because if the date doesn't change, then we have a very different industry moving forward. We're going to be watching enormous contraction, a lot of uncertainty, and if we don't, and if litigation is not successful or it drags out and takes a long time, then that uncertainty is going to cause, I think, significant contraction. And with that contraction and the inability to sell products, or the concern about the inability to sell products, I think that the ability of this industry to mount an effective front for changing the scheme diminishes. That's why this is so important. We got to win phase one so that we can move on to phase two.
Exactly, and it looks like we're waiting for that August date to come around, and we're going to hammer in phase one. Thank you for that great explanation, Tony. We have time for one viewer question real quick, and then we're going to move on to Dimitri. We have a viewer question. Is it true that the Cole-Bishop amendment contains new regulatory guidelines regulating us as vapor products instead of tobacco, thus leaving us with a more detrimental outcome, giving big tobacco control over vapor products drafted by RJR?
No, on all counts. That's an interesting question, but the answer is simply no. What the Cole-Bishop Amendment does is it simply says that you have to put on your packages underage use prohibited. You have to put on your packages accurate nicotine content. That the FDA will start a battery regulation process, which they've already done. So figure that into your analysis of what the amendment actually does. That retailers who are, unless you're already registered to, unless you're already required to register under a state or FDA law, that all of the other retailers will have to register with the FDA. So I think the questioner is perhaps a bit confused about creating a new regulatory scheme. What's most important is noting that all of the things that are in Cole-Bishop are things that industry has already stood up and said, yeah, we think these things are reasonable. Yes, these are things that we should be doing. So, and that's why this amendment is actually accessible to people from both parties, because they say, yeah, this is rational regulation. This is something that we should be doing. And I think that that's why we have a good chance for success.
Thank you again for that explanation, Tony. We're going to move on, and we have some more questions for you. We'll have a short general Q&A section here at the end. But before we move on to Dimitri, is there any last point you wanted to leave us with?
Well, really just the importance of what we're doing next. So we're going to be distributing some materials so that people can know how to push for the Cole-Bishop Amendment. We're going to be working with our state organizations like Dimitris's group, the Tennessee Smoke-Free Association, which has done great work both at the state and at the federal level, and in our other affiliated groups. And so we encourage everybody to stay tuned and watch for the guidance that we're going to continue to send out.
Great. Thanks for that, Tony. Our next speaker today is Dimitris Agrafiotis, also known as the Vaping Greek. Dimitri is the chairman of SEVIA USA and co-operator of Mountain Oaks Vapor, the secretary of Vista, and the host for the Smoke-Free Radio Network. Dimitri, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me again. I don't have my Greek kitchen background anymore, and I missed a memo from Tony on a suit and tie, so I feel a bit underdressed. But thanks.
Oh, that's okay.
Thanks to White Cloud for hosting these very informative webinars.
Well, it's our pleasure, Dimitri, and we're going to jump right into some questions here for you. Dimitri, you are the chairman of SEVIA USA. Can you tell us a little bit about SEVIA and how did they come about, and what are their goals?
Sure. SEVIA USA is actually something that I have been working on for the past 2 years. That's when the process started. In fact, back in April 2014, when we saw the draft guidance for the deeming regulations, we anticipated that this day would come. And again, I just want a footnote here that we kind of knew that this deeming regulation guidance would probably come sometime this year. And it was the worst case scenario, as we expected. So I started working with the Chinese a couple of years ago through my relationship with them, trying to get them organized as manufacturers to be able to help us here in the United States. So 2 years ago, SEVIA was formed in China by the big four companies, Innikin, Kanger, Smoke, and Aspire. And it was started as a Chinese manufacturers group in China. They helped us fund one of the studies that is now being used in the EU for the TBD regulations on the consistency and the efficiency of nicotine delivery to the user using open systems, what is generally now on the market, and how much better they are in delivering nicotine to the user. So as time progressed, again, we felt the pressure coming on a federal level. And we went back to China with my friend Phil Busardo, which was very instrumental in getting this thing done. And we made a presentation in Shenzhen in January explaining what the deeming regulations would do to the industry here and, of course, to the industry in China. And a little bit unfortunate, but everything that I presented at the Chinese conference actually came true, which kind of triggered them to understand the severity of the deeming regulations for their business as well, too. And that's when the decision was made then, again, leading but with the big four companies to form SEVIA USA, which is a nonprofit trade association here in the United States representing their interests. And I'm glad to say that after it was launched, 5 more companies have joined us, Heaven's Gifts, iJoy, Joytech, which is a huge company, Sense. And just today, we're announcing that Horizon Tech has joined SEVIA USA as well, too. So we have 9 of the biggest manufacturers on board from China. And the goal for SEVIA, in a nutshell, is to help with the litigation and the legislative efforts that here in the United States in order to keep these vapor products available. Big misconception about Chinese is, a lot of them are not vapors. They're businesses. They're not as passionate as tobacco harm reduction as we are here, but they do want to protect their interests and they do want to have these products available. Well, maybe with the exception of a couple of the owners, George Heron from Innikin is an ex-smoker. He uses vapor products now, so not all of them, but the majority are businesses. And they simply don't have that same regulatory authority in China, such as we have here. Bodies like the FDA, the EPA, the USDA that can literally shut down an industry overnight. So it was the goal of it was to be able to explain to them in plain English what these regulations can do on their business, because a lot of them did not understand, and also a way to guide them on what we're going to need funds for. And the 2 pathways that we have now obviously are legislative and litigation, and we both committed money to both of those causes. Obviously, the litigation that the industry is having right now with the Right to Be Smoke-Free Coalition. And we also partnered up with VTA. We totally agree with the strategy that Vapor Technology Association brings. And we think that's going to be instrumental in helping us go through the legislative process of moving the predicate date. A lot of these products that these vape shops sell will be eliminated if the predicate date does not change. And we know that, the vape shop owners know that, and of course the Chinese manufacturers know that. So it's extremely important to move the grandfather date from the 2007 date, and those are the two immediate actions that SEVIA is doing right now. Also, we want to support the nonprofit organizations. We want to support organizations like CASA and the American Vaping Association, which work tirelessly with volunteers and try to we have committed financially to assist them as well.
Great. Thank you for that, Dimitri. We have an excellent viewer question here that relates right to this topic. Are there any plans for SEVIA to operate in the UK too? I'm not aware of such a body over here, but then I might have just missed it.
Baby steps. It's extremely difficult to try to go globally with something like this. We have to start somewhere. Not that I agree with the TPD regulations. I think they're just as bad as the FDA regulations, but I'm only one person, and we had to start somewhere. The need right here in the U.S. is immediate, and hopefully we will be successful here, where we can give confidence to the Chinese. There is a difference in culture here as well too. The Chinese have to entrust in you, and they have to see result in what you're doing. And hopefully, if we're successful here, to help them as manufacturers, and of course to help the vape shops and the community here, maybe we can expand it over to the EU as well too. It's going to take more manpower. It's going to take more sleepless nights, but I think that we can eventually do that. But once again, it's baby steps. Unfortunately, nobody from the EU reached out to them in the past couple of years. Like I said, this was a 2-year process. It didn't happen overnight. So you can imagine what we had to go through to be able to get to the stage that we are now, having these 9 companies and hopefully many more, because there were over 100 e-cig manufacturers during my presentation. Now, some of them are smaller manufacturers, but hopefully we're going to get a lot more manufacturers on board, and then we can expand it globally.
That's excellent to hear, Dimitri. Now, to shift gears a little bit and bring it back stateside, how difficult is it to start a state-level advocacy group like Smoke Free Tennessee, and what steps does it take?
Yeah, I think that, with the deeming regulations come out, we shouldn't lose track of what's happening in states. I mean, currently right now, Alaska has a 75% wholesale tax. We saw what happened in Illinois trying to raise the tax. Here in Tennessee, we had pretty much the same deal as California. So it's extremely important for every state to be organized. This has been my goal since day one when I launched the Tennessee Smoke Free Association. I wanted to create a local group that can oversee the state with their own lobbyists. We have a lobbyist here that we've hired year-round that does an excellent job for us, and also be able to reach the small businesses. It's extremely difficult for a small shop to reach directly into a national organization. So my goal was to form an association that the shops can turn to for help locally. The organization can turn to a federal group, such as the VTA, because the Tennessee Smoke Free Association is a member of the VTA, when we need federal guidance, and we can help each other in the state. There were a lot of difficulties at the beginning. I'm not going to lie to you, simply because we are a fairly new industry. We are running with limited funds. However, to successfully operate a state association for the year, we're looking at between $80,000 to $100,000 budget for our states. Of course, it's going to be a little bit bigger for some of the larger states that have more vape shops. We started with 20 members. We're proud to have 82 members now in the state that are part of the association. And we have to continue to grow. I personally believe the Independent State Association is the best model for the states, because it gives the authority to that state and to the businesses to make decisions on matters that actually affect them in their particular state. And it's worked very well for us here. It's worked for us very well in Georgia, Kentucky, Florida, and other states that have implemented this Independent Smoke-Free Association model. Difficult, but not impossible, and more states are proving it.
Excellent. Well, to stay focused on the state regulation landscape, the New Jersey government currently has a bill that would ban all e-liquid flavors other than tobacco, menthol, or clove. Are you familiar with this particular bill? And if so, is its passing a possibility?
It's my understanding that thanks to the great work, a lot of vape shop owners and vapors showed up at the hearing. It did have a huge possibility of passing, unfortunately. But through the work of the local association there, Gregory Conley from the AVA and others, it is my understanding that it's been dropped down to a different committee. So we still have some time. It's extremely important for businesses to reach out to the representatives. This is the most important aspect of owning a business. Nobody in their district, not a politician in the district, want to see jobs go away, and they definitely don't want to see votes go away. So it's all about education. Education is key. book meetings. Don't just send emails. Book meetings. Meet with them face to face. Sit down. Express your concerns. Express what these regulations would do to your business, to your employees, and have them understand tobacco harm reduction, because it is a concept that, unfortunately, harm reduction in general in the United States hasn't been well received over the past 50, 60 years. So I think that once you sit down and you educate them and tell them what effect that these proposed regulations will have on your industry, we have a good chance of shifting, not everybody, but some of the people that could potentially shift the vote in our favor. And we've seen that happen multiple times.
Now, Dimitri, with so much negativity and concern about regulations going on, what are some of the victories that vapers have had recently?
Just this past week, West Virginia was successful getting an amendment that we're trying to raise the taxes and include vapor products as well too. Delegate Larry Faircloth in that state, along with Shell Hamill from the SEVIA chapter in Texas, and others in the state, were very successful in lobbying, and it was a close vote, but it's a win, and I'll take a win any day. They were able to remove the vapor products from that category. Here in Tennessee this past year, we had a couple bad bills that were threatening, obviously, the 21 plus, defining vapor as tobacco, and classifying vapor products as drug paraphernalia. Thankfully, with the great work of our lobbyists and our wonderful vendors here in the state that pushed very hard with their representatives, we were able to defeat all of those. Similar wins in Florida with some bad legislation there. And my neighbors here, Georgia, they had a really bad bill that mimicked the one in Indiana. And when that bill came across our desk, thanks to the lobby effort that they had there, we quickly organized with Tony from VTA, CASA, various other groups. We acted very quickly, and we were very successful in pushing that legislation back that would basically eliminate all e-liquid manufacturers in the state, plus no out-of-state manufacturers will be able to send liquid into that state, much like the bill in Indiana.
Great. Thank you for that, Dimitri. We're going to move on to some viewer questions here. So we have one, and this question gets asked quite a bit too. As a vapor, is there anything besides writing letters and making phone calls to my representative that I should be doing?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I always believe in meeting people eye to eye. I also, I'm a firm believer, good friend of mine in the industry, Brian Fodick and Pamela Gorman, told me once, it's very important to do some background work on the politicians before you meet them. It's extremely important to know how they voted in the past, who they are, mostly friendly with, and be able to meet with them and adjust the language that you use with them without having to upset them, trying to shift them to your side. And obviously speak to non-vapers and non-smokers. Unfortunately, the public perception of vaping is horrible currently for whatever reason. But I think that for us just to be focusing on vapers is wrong. We need to open up a little bit our eyes and our reach. Get out there, talk to smokers about this product. Get out there and speak to non-vapers and non-smokers about this product, how it's affected your life, and try to get the public perception with us. If we let these people know that the government is trying to overreach here with these FDA regulations and not allow us to live a healthier lifestyle, what stops them from coming next year and banning sodas or something else that somebody else might enjoy? So trying to tell to those people what we're trying to go through, I think it's going to help us in the long run.
Excellent. Thank you for that detailed explanation as well. It's important to remember that we have to get the non-smokers on our side too. It's really easy to get the smokers to say, hey, e-cigs can be harm reduction and we can kind of move this forward, but it's those non-smokers that we really have to rally to our side. So Dimitri, I really appreciate the explanation. We're going to move on to the general Q&A section here, but I wanted to thank you for the time that you spent with us. But before we move on, is there any last point you want to leave the audience with?
No, I think it's extremely important for people to understand the facts. Please read, make decisions. We're all adults. We're adult consumers of electronic cigarettes. We should really look at the pathway of what we need to do right now as an industry. I agree with Tony that Cole Bishop is the only vehicle right now that could put a freeze on this moving of the FDA regulations come August 8th, which effectively would pretty much ban this entire industry. And it's extremely important to understand that in order for us to continue our legislative fight and litigation fight in the next 2 years, we have to be able to continue to sell products. Without funding, none of our strategies will work. So moving the predicate date right now is the most important thing so we can continue to sell our products and continue to be able to gather the funds that are necessary to eventually win one day the entire battle, and hopefully we have a good plan laid out for that.
Excellent. Thank you, Dimitri. Now we're going to move on to the general Q&A section, and I'm just going to toss some viewer questions up into the air, and Dimitri or Tony, whoever feels like fielding the question, please feel free. So is there any chance that the vapor industry could ever be regulated separately from tobacco industry?
Tony, go ahead.
Well, I mean, there's always a chance, but I think you have to look at some real practical and political realities. So whatever that chance is, it's down the road, and that's going to take a lot of work. So being regulated as a separate product right now is something that is of interest to everybody, right? But the practical realities is we are where we are. So unless a litigation strategy could somehow upend the entire basis upon regulating these products under the Tobacco Control Act, that would force Congress then to look at a completely different approach. That would be possibly one way, but it's very, very unlikely. So I think what we need to do as an industry is, first of all, preserve what we have right now so that everybody can stay viable and in business and moving forward. Second, start to implement some of these common sense regulations on our own, right? It's like any industry that often talks about wanting to self-regulate often has to come up with some things that it would do on its own to do that. We think that the Cole-Bishop Amendment actually provides a basis for that. But I think what the key is if we can keep the industry vibrant by passing this amendment and getting it through Congress now, what we can then do is go to work on what I was talking about earlier, Bob, which is phase 2. And phase 2 is coming up with a rational regulatory scheme that actually applies appropriately to our products. So, you know, it's almost too early to decide whether or not that should be within FDA or outside of FDA. And it's a great intellectual process. But what's really important is that we use the monstrosity of the deeming regulation to continue to build our case. And in that kind of strange way, you know, this deeming regulation, I agree with Dr. Siegel, who was on your show a few weeks ago, when he said that this is actually the way that they drafted the deeming, which is not much drafting. They just simply said tag your tobacco, and not much more thought went into it. But because they've overlaid this arduous regulatory scheme that doesn't really work with our products, it imposes certain requirements that are just simply unable to be complied with, and frankly if we give the FDA what they want, thousands upon thousands upon thousands of applications, right? That's what they're asking for. If we actually could give them those applications, they would never be able to process them, right? So all of this is adding up to a very good argument that we have, which is that, look, we understand what you did or why you did it, because you couldn't do anything else but say tag your tobacco. And the reason they couldn't do that was because of the SEVIA decision. So it was the only way for the FDA to do something on the issue. Was it very forward thinking? No. And was it analyzing our product in the way that it should be? No. But that's what they did. However, they kind of handed us a club to beat them over the head with, and I think that's what we need to turn our efforts towards doing. Beat them up with the fact that what they put together makes no sense at all. And that sets the stage for coming up with real, meaningful regulations that actually work for this innovative technology industry.
I'd like to add something here as well too, Bob, if I could. I totally agree with Tony. I think if you look back, even from 2014, when the deeming regulations were announced, even through the 100,000 plus comments that the FDA received, the meetings with the OMB that all the stakeholders had in expressing our displeasure with the way that we're trying to regulate the product. Even Mitch Zeller at the TMA last week that I was attending said, when he was on the podium, he said, "Well, this was kind of brought onto you because of the SEVIA decision. We try to regulate the pharmaceutical, but the only other option we have is tobacco. So we have to understand that the FDA is limited." Now, could they have taken a different regulatory scheme? Yeah, I think they could. But at this point, with the industry being so large and so many products on the market, I don't think they had a choice. And I agree with Tony as well. What we do know is that the pathway PMTA and the way that the regulations are now are virtually impossible for 99.9% of the industry. And that's what we have to keep in mind. So let's not go too far ahead. Let's look at what we can do right now before we try to challenge and try to get this product into a different regulatory framework. We have to look what's now. The PMTA is definitely not a pathway for us, and we need to stop it.
Great. Thank you for that explanation, Dimitri. We have a follow-up question from the audience here. Are either of you aware of any states that have begun trying to enforce vape stores to carry a tobacco reseller's permit?
I think there's various states that have done that already. I think in California, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tony. I know there's some states, I think Florida and some counties, because counties can have that authority to do that as well.
Yeah, that's one of those bills that having a good lobbyist in place and having a strategy in place is helpful with. You know, as Dimitris knows from his organization, and when you actually are plugged into the process with the right lobbyist and the right team in place, then you get information on what's happening early. I know some states have actually looked towards coming up with a licensing scheme because it helps legitimize the industry, for example. And that's one of those things that as a group, you can decide, as a state group, you can decide, is that something that you want to pursue? And that's the unique aspect of, and the important aspect of also being invested at the state level and being organized, because whatever happens at the federal level, the states are going to take action. And I've been saying this for months and months and months as we've been waiting the deeming regulation. I said if the deeming regulation came down hard, the states were going to go all in. And if the deeming regulation somehow came down soft, the states would go all in. Because the bottom line is they believe that they need to and should be doing something. And that's what drives, frankly, most of the legislation, that and organized lobbying efforts. So you have to be aware of what's happening in your own backyard. Otherwise, you could find yourself kind of like what's been happening in Indiana, and also but being aware and being organized is going to help you out like they did in Georgia.
Yeah, and I think if I can just add to that again, Bob, here in Tennessee, with having a lobby year round, we get ahead of time what is coming in legislation next year. So we can develop a plan, sit down with the stakeholders of the state, with the businesses in Tennessee, discuss the issues with our lobbyists, and find a path on how we want to attack the various issues. I just want to give you a brief example, because there's some language that's introduced in states that does make sense. And then we work with our legislators, as we did here a couple years ago, to pass an 18+ ban on these products in the state for those that are underage. So we proactively went after the legislators to push them to pass this legislation. And also child-proof caps, which, at this stage of the industry, it should be a standard for our products that contain nicotine. So by giving them the proactive approach as the Tennessee Smoke-Free Association, it makes us look like we're a more legitimate industry, and it opens up the doors easier as well too, when they see that you're not one of these groups that basically says we don't want any regulation at all, which is not a reality in these days, whether that's state or federal.
Absolutely. And that's something that here at White Cloud we try to do, stay proactive with these regulations to ensure that we're in compliance before the actual legislation comes down. Another viewer question here. If Congressman Cole thought that H.R. 2058 was dead or not possible, wouldn't the congressman withdraw his bill? We see more people signing up for the bill this week.
Yeah, that's you want me to answer that, Dimitris?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question, but it just doesn't comport with kind of the reality of the legislative process. A bill is an idea. A bill is an idea that gets put on paper. A bill is an idea that gets put on paper and gets filed in Congress, right? There are thousands upon thousands of bills that get filed. And they have different lifespans, right? But they all have one lifespan, which is that at the end of the 2-year session, all the bills die and we restart over again with a new set of bills. So, and you see this at the state level also. I mean, I can't tell you how many bills we track in the states that never go anywhere. In this case, the unique aspect of it is that he had language that was the same language that they tried to run in the House Appropriations Strategy in December of 2015. And, we collectively got our clock cleaned, frankly, on the issue. And that language ended up on the cutting room floor. So you don't go pull back a bill. There's no real need to do that. It would be a meaningless exercise, frankly. And supporting it is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, saying that you support that is not a bad thing, and that's not at all what we're saying. What we're saying is, as an industry, we really need to focus, because time is short to get this changed. And there's one vehicle that's moving, and that's Representative Cole's Cole-Bishop amendment. And the reason that that's moving, again, is because it has bipartisan support, and it is actually attached to a vehicle that must move through the Congress at some point. So you don't have to be a legislative expert to figure this out. Yeah, the HR 2058 exists, but it's just not part of a relevant exercise right now if you really want to get something done. Because don't forget, standalone bills, there's very little time left in this session. We're going to come back in June. They're going to deal with they're going to deal with the appropriations bills. Then they go on their summer recess. Don't forget, we've got campaigns coming up in the fall and elections to worry about. So there's going to be little time to move a standalone bill. And if you wanted to move a standalone bill in this particular year, you would have it moving already. So adding co-sponsors to a bill like 2058 is great, but it just doesn't make the bill move. Because bills don't move by themselves.
And Bob, again, I'm jumping in here because I've talked about this extensively with my representative here, Congressman Chuck Fleischman, and Ashley Davis, which is a partner at Westfront Strategies, which is VTA's lobbying group, and a person that I have the utmost respect. I've worked with her for the past 2-3 years, going to the Hill and advocating for vapor products. And she said it best: no bill really dies. That was the first vehicle that Representative Cole did, trying to save the industry. But what we have to look at here is legislative facts and reality. People signing up for HR 2058 is fine. I don't see anything wrong with it. But telling the community and telling business owners to reach out to the representatives and only ask for support for HR 2058, I think is working against us. Because what we have to see is, what is the vehicle moving? And these representatives will look at what bill is moving. And the only thing that is moving is Cole Bishop, and the time is running out on it. If I would suggest anything, if people are infatuated with HR 2058, I would highly suggest that when you reach out to your representatives, to ask support for both.
Yeah, and just one final point, if I may, Bob, on that, because I think a lot of people, they understand that Representative Cole is associated with both bills. And it's not incumbent upon a representative to simply say, oh, ignore what I was trying to do before. But he clearly did say that the strategy that they used last year did not work, and his new language is markedly better. But really, the key issue is there a strategy to move HR 2058? I don't see one. I don't see a strategy behind it. Simply, advocating for something is great and it's important, and people should be doing that. But it doesn't mean that you actually have a strategy in place in Washington, D.C. with a lobbying team that is actually going to move that bill. So that's why, again, right now we have to focus as an industry and as consumers on pushing the one bill that's going to actually preserve all that choice in the marketplace. And that's why we're so excited about this opportunity.
Great. Thank you for clarification on that, guys. It's good to know that the vehicle that we should be backing right now really is the Cole Bishop Amendment. We do have another question here from the audience, and they ask, is there a litigation strategy for an injunction against the FDA on the undue burden to the industry to comply to these regulations?
I'll jump in first, Tony. Obviously, there's been 2 lawsuits filed already by Nicopure, Halo, which is a member of the VTA, and also Lost Art e-liquids. We, as a group, as SEVIA USA and Tennessee Smoke-Free Association, are supporting litigation that is being brought on by what we call the industry coalition. Even other groups, as AVA, CASA, AIMSA, have supported as well. Not Blowing Smoke, SFATA. They're supporting the litigation effort that's being kind of spearheaded by Right to Be Smoke-Free Coalition. And Right to Be Smoke-Free Coalition is not really a group. It's just a vehicle to be able to fund the lawsuit that's being brought on by Keller and Heckman and Azim Chowdhury's team, which I have, again, a lot of confidence in. I think Azim is a great attorney, and I think they have a great team there at Keller and Heckman. So as far as the industry is concerned, I highly suggest that everybody backs this lawsuit. It's going to be the lawsuit that represents every level, the small business, the medium enterprise, and some of the larger companies that are out there, as well as a lot of the associations that have signed on to support that. So yes, there is one more, and I'm sure there'll be, Tony will probably know more, but I'm sure there's a couple other lawsuits that are going to be filed here in the near future, maybe from other groups or from other companies as well.
And Tony, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, sure. I mean, the lawsuits are a key component of the next phase of the battle. Now, the question is, as of right now, no one's filed a motion for a preliminary injunction, right? So as a result of that, the deeming regulation will go into effect on August 8, 2016, unless and until one of the plaintiffs or in one of the lawsuits is able to obtain that type of injunction. And that's going to require, obviously, some more work. And so, we have yet to see whether one of those plaintiffs is going to take that action. So people need to understand, because I've heard people say, well, now that a lawsuit's been filed, that means that the FDA has stopped from doing what they are doing. That is completely false. And, as a litigator for over 20 years, I can tell you that, lawsuits will drag out for quite some time. So the key to having the lawsuit impact the short-term effect of the regulations for the industry is going to be getting an injunction motion passed. So you have to have the right plaintiff to do that, and you have to be able to achieve a very difficult standard. But it can be done, but it's got to be done in the right way. So the folks that have filed lawsuits to date, and also Azim Chowdhury and his team, are very smart lawyers, and I know that those will probably be 3 lawsuits, and there'll probably be more. So more challenges, the merrier.
I also want to add, Bill, Bob. I'm sorry I keep calling you Bill for some reason.
That's okay.
But I want to add that there's not one solution to solve this immediate threat that we have. That's why I believe in legislation and litigation, and that was actually the title of my podcast a couple of weeks ago. We have to have this 1-2 punch. In order to get an injunction granted, you basically have to prove to the judge that you can win the case. It's extremely difficult. And it takes the right team to be able to do it. And as Tony said, both of these lawsuits have been filed, have not taken that pathway. And we're hoping, I really can't speak on the details of the lawsuit because I don't know them myself. But keep in mind that an injunction is extremely difficult to be granted because you basically have to win the case right at that point. So we're hoping for that, but we can't forget about the other vehicles as well, too. So we have to work both with legislation and both with litigation to be able to stop the bleeding right now in order for us to continue to do business. And at the end of the day, what's really close to my heart is helping smokers. If we're not able to keep these products on the market that work, we know they have substantially helped to increase the conversion rate of smokers to vapors. That is the biggest public health tragedy, in my opinion, in these deeming regulations. So it's extremely important to be able to move that predicate date.
Yeah, it seems like the predicate date is the biggest battle that we're facing right now, and that's where all of our efforts should be focused on. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. We got time for just about one more question here, and this is a rather long question, but we want to make sure we got to it. So Senator Johnson, the chairman of the Committee of Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, sent a letter to the FDA asking if asking their data, since they don't have sufficient data on the harm caused by electronic cigarettes, that if these regulations are too much too soon. Do you guys have any comments or thoughts about that?
Yeah, cheers to Senator Johnson. I mean, I think that, his letter encapsulated a lot of the angst that is felt by the community right now, both the vapors individually and as well as the professional business community. And, he encapsulated what a lot of the frustration and thoughts are that we have. We are, without a doubt, stuck in a very difficult position. We have an uphill battle against us. The good news is that we have a lot of ammunition, and everybody knows that because we talk every single day about the fact that a new study came out, the Royal College came out, Public Health England is out there. We have more and more public health advocates coming to the fore. So essentially buying some more time for the industry to continue to make that case is why getting the predicate date change now is so essential. And that because I believe fundamentally that the more research that comes out, the more studies and surveys that come out, the more our case will be made. And Congress is going to have to take note. And his shot with his letter is a shot across the bow saying, hold on 1 minute, you guys might have really messed this up. And we'll see if and how they respond at the end of this month.
Also, keep in mind, this shows the power of businesses reaching out to Senator Johnson. Johnson Creek, one of the oldest companies in the vapor space, is in Senator Johnson's district. They just spent millions of dollars building a 160,000 square feet facility. They're going to be employing, I don't know, over 100 people. So it just goes to show you the power of reaching out to your representative and letting them know, hey, we have an issue here. Look what's going to happen in your district right now if these FDA deeming regulations. Now, there's a lot of small companies out there, and you're just as important as some of these larger companies. And I know there's big vapor companies as well that employ 50, 60, 100 people as well, too. This is your power, reaching out face-to-face with your representatives and letting them know that these regulations are not only damning to public health, but they're also damning in the economy in their district. And trust me, I promise you that they will listen to you and they will act.
Great. Thank you for clarification on that, guys. We're all out of time today. Tony, Dimitri, I want to thank you personally for taking the time out of your day to be with us and all the great work that you're doing for the vaping industry. Tony, do you have any last thoughts you want to leave the audience with?
I do. I've heard a lot of angst, especially from people who watched the FDA's webinar the other day. People's minds are being blown by the inappropriate way in which they're continuing to talk about our product. And that collective angst we have to let it dissipate. We have to channel that, and we have to march forward together. So I would really encourage people, go to our website, vaportechnology.org, and look at the FDA, Vape and the FDA conference. If you can make it, even for the second day, where we're going to hit the hill and push for the Cole-Bishop Amendment, now is the time to act. We would love to have you, and we encourage everybody to get behind that amendment.
Great. Thank you, Tony. Dimitri, is there any last final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with? Yeah, certainly. Absolutely. I want. I know everybody's angered. I come from the community side of vaping. It saved my life and my wife's life and hundreds of people that I've helped convert. So I know everybody's angry. I know everybody's frustrated and clearly shocked at what the FDA is trying to do here. We need to be able to shift that anger, that frustration towards the positive outcome. I truly believe one day we're going to win, but we all have to work united for the greater good of the community. And lastly, after the webinar, as Tony said a couple days ago, yesterday from the FDA, which confused, I think, a lot more people than it did give them guidance, it's extremely important to look to sources for answers. Facebook, social media is not legal help. So everybody interprets these regulations differently. So please reach out to your local state groups if you want to, and then reach out to larger associations such as the VTA and participate and get your answers. Because you might not be able to afford legal help like some of the bigger companies that have hired FDA attorneys, but to me, every shop, whether you have 2 employees or 2,000, is important to this industry. So reach out and become part of an organization to be able to get accurate answers and not somebody that replies to you on Facebook on how to do your business that could potentially put you in trouble one day. Great. Thanks for that, Dimitri. It's good to note that, Facebook is not our resource for legal advice. Gentlemen, make sure everybody in the audience is following these two on the various social media channels, Vapor Technology Association for Tony and Dimitri's various channels there in social media. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. We'll be emailing out a copy of the video and audio sometime within the next 24 to 48 hours. And we had a lot of questions come in on this webinar, and we are going to do our best to answer every question that came through in a timely fashion. So keep an eye out on the website and our social media channels for those answers as well. Again, thank you everybody for taking time out of your day. We have our next webinar coming up June 6th with Aaron Biebert from A Billion Lives. And I hope I see you all on Thursday, and have a great day. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.